Check, check. Okay, so we are getting so dialed in with our technology that we will start our Bethel U early. Amazing. Um, so this session is called The Next Steps in Dreaming in 2022. So last week, we took sort of a Bible study approach, but explored possibilities and both categorizing and thinking about where our strengths as a congregation were and ways that we can deepen our identity, particularly with that Genesis story of Jacob. And so sort of how I've been thinking about Bethel based on that story has been about experiencing and extending the shelter of God's love. Knowing that Bethel means house of God, sort of thinking about what we already experience and how we try to reach out as well. And so today we're going to look at getting a little bit more practical and what are some of the top priorities that the new council in 2022 will be looking at, sort of some practical next steps. And one of the biggest ones is staffing. When you get the annual report, which I believe is coming out this week, so that you can have some light reading in advance of our meetings. One of the pieces I highlight in my letter is this awareness of the empty office across the way from me. And ever since I've come to Bethel, I've been observing the congregation and leading with the assumption that office would be filled eventually. And so staffing is one of our major priorities, and to be beginning the call process. And then the other piece is this whole world of digital ministry. So the digital front door, which is our website, and then our online worship, how we can enhance those pieces. So those are the two. There's many, many other ways we could have gone, but those are some of the foundational priorities for living into 2022. So first, we're going to talk about staffing. And I'm going to hang out for a long time on this slide. So there were so many considerations when I first arrived. People were like, have you considered a parish nurse? Have you considered a visitation pastor? We're used to having an associate pastor. I was intrigued about the deacon role, which is the deacon role has always been part of the ELCA, but we have heightened awareness of it now that they're on the same roster as the pastors are. And I had even a fifth column where I wanted an intern. I was so excited about the large congregation. I was like, wow, we could have an intern. Wouldn't that be cool? That is still cool, but I quickly learned that interns take supervision, and in many, not all cases, they can sometimes be more work than help. So I eliminated that column from our consideration for now. Might be a future dream, but needing to prioritize right now. But particularly, I think there's lots and lots of considerations as we look at these pieces. I think people get excited about the cost, and that it seems like we meet a need, and a parish nurse or a visitation pastor are at least on paper a much less expensive option for doing the work of the church. One piece I've been noticing is that there's some hidden costs with these two columns that come in the form of supervision and communication. And as a new pastor to having a large staff, those are not necessarily my fortes, so they take some time. But if we have a visitation pastor working 10 hours a week, that might at least 2 hours, one one for supervising and making sure that the person is coordinated with the staff, and probably one for just making sure work is being done and communicating that way. So I was realizing, like, it looks like 10 hours of support, but it ends up being more like 8, and it has mentally, it adds to my plate in some ways, in terms of another person to supervise and make sure isn't lost in communication. Another piece I highlight in my pastoral report is I think that the congregation, I hope not too much, but is aware that I am stretched on a pastoral care level. I'm able to maybe meet the on-fire needs, but I never am able to follow up the way I hope, or the way I think Bethel expects, fully. And I do have the wonderful support of the befrienders, but it's a piece that I think is most noticeable to the congregation, in terms of my strain on pastoral care. Where I would say you might not be as aware of, but I'm aware of not being at full potential, is on service and outreach. With such a large congregation and the needs of worship and pastoral care and education, I don't have as much time to build relationships with the community, which is a major part that bolsters our ministry. I've met a few times with Habitat or CAC. Thank goodness Dana's a member, so I can count that up farther. And we have wonderful boards that facilitate those meetings. But in my ideal world, and what I think Bethel needs as for leadership, is someone who can be strengthening those relationships and coordinating, reading the needs of the community and coordinating the congregational response better. And so that's a piece that I think is that maybe the congregation is not aware of, but that we need that skill set and we need additional support there. It is nice to have some weeks off with preaching, and that sounds cavalier. The deeper need is to hear the word of God preached to you sometimes, and how much it fills me up to hear colleagues, and luckily at retreats and things like that, the bishop preaches to the rostered leaders and things like that. But it is such a gift to have an associate, or I shouldn't say that, an associate, a deacon, or a visitation pastor, to bring the word of God and let me renew that way. A piece that I think is desirable, where I don't feel necessarily stretched, but I feel maxed, and would love more flexibility, and would be around faith formation, whether it's teaching adult education and coordinating with our committees, or even supporting the confirmation programming, or supporting like Limitless and our younger kids. And so these were sort of major areas of ministry, and I sort of did this table version to say why I've asked the budget to include that the associate and deacon most seriously, to assume we're going to go into a call process, have Pastor Phil helping us for that time, but with this vision so that we can keep dreaming forward and to really be as fully functioning as I think we can be. So we're going to go a little bit, I put how are deacons and associates different becomes the question. And I've added a plus sign to say a special emphasis. Because associate pastors and deacons are both rostered leaders in the ELCA. That means that not only they have the training, often a master's, either a master's of arts or a master's of divinity, they also have had formation, a candidacy process that both deacons and pastors go through, and that they are ordained by the ELCA, which I think is important. And so I wanted to just play a little bit more to help you understand those differences, because it's newer language to us. The major piece in terms of the gifts that they bring to the table is word and sacrament, is the pastors, or word and service, which is the deacons. And these are the little blurbs that the ELCA website has. But you think about word and sacrament, that's baptism and communion primarily, but is the sacrament piece of it. Word and service can be a lot of things. So sometimes deacons are a little harder to pin down than pastors in terms of where they serve, how they show up in the world. So wanting to mention these pieces. In our synod, there are word and service deacons serving in in family ministries and youth ministries. We met Ross Murray, who doesn't serve within a congregation at all and works for a nonprofit. So that's where a deacon is a less known quantity, even at the national level. Pastors are a little bit more, you know what you're getting. Sometimes they're working for nonprofits or things too. But at the same time, I would say that that's something to hold in terms of what we have in Northfield, in terms of the gifts we have available within the congregation and within this community, and how can we enhance what we have here. So within Bethel, our context, I've already spoken to these pieces. We definitely have a need for more pastoral care support. It would help us to have faith formation flexibility, committee coordination, preaching, and worship. And I missed outreach because it was so built into service, I would say. No, that was within. That's why it's not on this slide. But there's also this reading of Northfield. Bethel and Northfield are blessed with an abundance of folks ordained to word and sacrament. This seems to be the place for ELCA pastors to retire. I think it has something to do with St. Olaf. And within this congregation, I think I had a coffee in the fall. I hope to have one regularly, COVID permitting, with some of our retired or just rostered leaders that might work up at the college. And I think we had like 11 people come to coffee, and it's such a support for me. It means that I do have someone to preach. Sometimes there's some health permitting and people age and are no longer available to help. And then sometimes they are parishioners, and so sometimes in terms of pastoral care, they aren't viewed the same way by a fellow parishioner as when I'm in the office of pastor. But we have this abundance, and I do feel that support. It's bigger than Bethel. St. John's has an abundance as well, and in the whole community. And but something that intrigues me is that when I was interviewing, the congregational reference was Scott Wapata of CIC. And I remember telling him, I was like, well, this is where I have experience, this is where I have lack of experience. And I was telling him about how Jackson, Wyoming, partly because of the wealth of that context, has an insane amount of nonprofits for a town of its size. And he was like, oh, Inger, I'd put Northfield right up against that. And I was like, really? Like, maybe this is a skill that fits Northfield too. And he said, I don't know if it's proximity to the Twin Cities, if it's the colleges, but we have a lot of nonprofits and a lot of good nonprofits here too. Again, it's a piece I haven't been able to fully explore yet. And when I read our context and partner churches, I would say that language of deacon, one piece is that it doesn't, it translates quite well between the Episcopal Church. It's a little different in the Catholic Church. They have the same term, but it means something else. But for Episcopals and for ELCA Lutherans, deacon means word and service. And I'm intrigued that we have all of the, if we could bring that skill set to Northfield, something that we don't have in the community, I think that'd be a gift to Bethel and a gift to Northfield. So those are questions I have. At the same time, it makes me nervous. We have a history of beloved associate pastors. I found this wonderful picture of Pastor Becca. And then, and you guys, I always hear about stories of Pastor Charlie as well. And then as exciting as deacons are, they're unfamiliar. I wanted to emphasize that horizontal sash is when you see a deacon, or a stole rather, but they wear their stole sideways. And so we met Deacon Ross, but he's not a deacon that serves in a congregation. So it's a bit of an unknown for us. So what the current council is leaning towards is trusting the call process. And when we form the call committee, not committing to deacon or associate, but writing the call description in such a way that the best candidate can come forward. And it's one roster. So it might be a rostered leader who happens to be a deacon or a rostered leader that happens to be a pastor. But probably trusting the call process to hold in balance where do we need additional support on what we already experience in terms of the shelter of God's love here at Bethel, and where do we what kind of balance we want in terms of extending the shelter of God's love into Northfield. And so I think that's the gifts and qualities, those kinds of questions. But I am encouraging them to write that call description with an open mind that could pull and with these considerations and excitement about possibly going in a new direction that Northfield hasn't seen. That is that priority. I'm now and we'll take questions at the end, but that was the deep dive into that section. The other piece, and Jen's going to help me with this section, is Bethel Online. And we call this, the website is the digital front door to the house of God, and worship. And really feeling the need for an upgrade. We want that website to be clean and current, easy to navigate, so that it really is extending welcome versus being a barrier. One of a sort of side note, even for how, some people might be like, I don't go to the website that much. I'm already a Bethel member. I'm good. It would also still add that experience piece in terms of enhancing our communication. Our hope is that the new website would support and drive a consolidation of communication. That's supposed to be forms. But I had fun with alliteration. Right now, we have a confusing cornucopia of lots of emails and formats, particularly if you might not know this if you're a retired one, but if you have a young person, you are probably getting the scoop and constant contact, as well as banner mailings, doodle polls, lots and lots of things. New websites can auto-populate, and to make sure that all of the same information, if there's a change in information, it goes so that we're more clear and we catch everybody. Some practical considerations with the website. The major themes are the cost to build, the cost to maintain, ability to self-maintain and update, and lifespan of the platform. And Jen is really spearheading these efforts, and I've very briefly captured two of the major local providers we have been talking to get sort of quotes and things. Would you like to speak here?
Yeah, we have talked to Juniper. They're wonderful people. They all would have been John, unfortunately. I tried to recruit them over here, but they seem to be like
May, you can take it off and let me get you a mic. Oh, hold on 2 seconds, Jen. Let me get you a mic for the live stream. Thanks. And now you'll have a mic so that the live stream can capture you as well.
So we have been researching a number of options. We met with Newberg here in town, and they were wonderful. Just lovely people, but they are St. John's members. I tried to recruit them to come over here because I think we'd get a better discount, but they seem pretty fixed. But what started this whole discussion was they did the St. John's website, if you ever take a look at that, and it was built over 7 years ago. And if you go there today, it's just as fresh and pretty and emotive as something that had built today. And I know that Bethel has had a pattern of maybe doing it in like 2-year chunks, little upgrades. I'd like to get to something that we can live with and live into for longer. So that's one option, and it will be not cheap. The second one is someone that our Tim Valley consultant brought to us. He works at St. Olaf. Again, wonderful person, and he's done quite a few local and regional websites. If you'd like to take a look at a couple, KYMN is one, and Towel Trades is another. If you want more, I'm happy to email you more. And then, go ahead.
I believe there's actually a little bit more research happening with this task force that Jen has created that it looks a little wider than Northfield. There is this advantage when we think about the maintain piece, depending on the support available. But there's, we joke about how many Mimi's on the Blackbaud helpline sometimes, but sometimes it's wonderful to have the big systems and they have support available. But sometimes it's great to have a local person who's a real face that you can get help on. So we were exploring local first. There is sort of a third line that is looking at other options.
The third line is we've just spent some time exploring other church websites, and there's some beautiful ones out there. Bethlehem up in the cities has a gorgeous and easy to navigate website. Mount Olivet is another. There's quite a few. And then if you look to see who created their websites, there's more, you get an idea of some of the other opportunities for us. So I'm exploring that. But what we're going to do next in our task force is decide what features are most important. We know we want to improve our online worship experience, and we've already made some really good strides in the last few weeks on audio. If anyone, you guys are here, so thank you. And thank you to Liam, who has joined us.
I have some slides specifically about the worship experience, so stay on website.
Okay, stay on the website. So, and then just kind of wanting to discuss, what features do we want to be able to offer on the website? Which ones would our congregation probably not be that interested in? And it really does help to research the other churches and see what they've decided to invest in or not invest in. Some are going as far as letting everybody have their own username and password. And once you log in, there's your directory for everybody in the church. But it's secure. It's not out there for public, consumption. You could go online and download your giving statement at any time. There's all kinds of things we want to weigh. And we have put together a task force of about 6 or 7 people with the goal of having a condensed 3 to 4 month, we call it a sprint, to get this done. And if anyone in our congregation has this skill set, especially on the more visual side, we'd love to invite them to participate in the task force.
I wanted to speak a little bit more about the digital worship piece. And particularly, I wanted to assure you, I am a big believer in pre-recorded, or a big fan of pre-recorded worship, as I think the best use of the digital medium, leaning into its strengths. It's a highly visual medium. It also has a shorter attention span, and so these are. Those are two key characteristics of digital worship. But I want it to be such a thing that it's God showing up in a unique way in this medium, and you won't want to miss it. Maybe you'll be like, well, I went to in-person, but it will be different. Yeah, the message will be the same, but I could fast forward, or like I might want to hear or see how they put it together. And so not an afterthought, not a second best option, but an experience of the shelter of God's love that is similar but distinct from an in-person worship service. There would, and I was having fun with this stained glass because it reminded me of Zoom screens. But like to realize that there is like a digital cathedral that you can build, and to like that we do need to be leaning into this ministry. I think, yeah, my personal bias is that the pre-recorded or hybrid worship is the strongest expression of this medium. You have control of visual focus. I'm fascinated by I have one of the best seats in the house, and I'm still 15 feet away from the candles. On my screen, I can be 2 feet from a flickering flame, and it hits my heart differently. Faces. I used to tease my old congregation. My sermons didn't get any better during the pandemic. They could just read my micro expressions because it was so intimate. Nature. I used to joke. I used to get images of moving water from the local surrounds. And I used to joke that God was the best assisting minister I've ever had, because I could make the water stretch just perfectly for the words that I was saying, and I could adjust the volume. There's also alternative ways to participation. Sometimes we're not as aware that sometimes people are painfully shy or suffer from anxiety, and being up in front of the assembly is, whether it's happening or not, they're worried about their outfit or a stutter. And when you have just the words on the screen and let somebody just record their voice and maybe have multiple takes of recording their voice till they get it where they want it, all of a sudden new people can serve in worship, and that's exciting to me. It's not just that our attention spans are shorter, but there's unprecedented flow. You don't have to wait for me to get out of my chair and walk up somewhere. We can edit and cut. And then I like that connection to space. So even though it's digital, in some ways you can be more rooted to Northfield, to the wilderness. All like you can bring in different pieces that we can't do in person. So those are things that excite me about digital worship. Oh, yep.
Can I say one thing? I think we are so lucky to have a pastor who has these technical skills and this vision. I mean, I'm baffled by what she had to do by herself at her last church and put out beautiful content. So I just admire that so much.
I'm excited, though, that we have, and Jen has been building a team so that I can have vision but not technical skills. And because it is very, very time intensive. And not just my time, but musicians' time. So Bethel was experiencing this. But it was okay when we were entirely online. then the time you'd spend in the sanctuary became the recording time. But poor Megan had double workload when we were doing on pre-recorded as well as in person. That is completely unsustainable from a human resource thing. So the proposal I've given our new team is that we will keep the live stream, partly because of the convenience, and my mom as my unofficial reviewer that I always get. She loved pre-recorded when I used to do it at Shepherd of the Mountains, but she has fallen in love with Bethel's live stream. And which I love, but it cracks me up, and I'm like, but, and she's like, no, I think I like seeing everybody come in. I'm like, okay. So I think we keep the live stream. We also use it as a content source. We now have Liam, who is skilled and can take just the sound, not have the image, and so that we can layer it, do all the cool things visually, but not have to ask Megan to record separately. And then we would standardize a digital template. I've actually met with Brent and Liam and have come up with a basic template we will use for pre-recorded worship. And then there's all this additional material editing, pre-recorded and beyond. One piece, though, that I think my plan going forward is, since we're keeping live stream, would be have the in-person worship and the live stream that happens simultaneously. And then the goal would be for the pre-recorded experience to come out by, say, 6 p.m. on Sunday night. But that protects our musician. It allows it to be fresh content, all of those things. So I think that's the best stewardship of our staff time, but still offering this exciting experience. And I think anecdotally, people are usually checking in with these experiences in alternative times. And so if we have the live stream, they're taken care of if they really want it at 8:30 a.m. But other than that, and then if COVID does anything unpredicted, and if we ever found ourselves in an online only situation again, we would, of course, prioritize the pre-record to be released earlier. And so I just had another plug for Liam, and I pulled this picture from the internet. And then also, as Jen was alluding to, a big piece of the online experience also, it happens to be enhancing our in-person worship experience, because audio is a big piece of this. And I believe you said 30% of our congregation
Either wears hearing aids or anticipate getting hearing aids. 30%.
and I will, this is our last slide, but I was going to let you speak more to this, and then we can take questions.
Sure. Either about 30%,
30% of our members either have hearing aids or said they anticipate getting them within the next 2 years when we did that survey earlier in the fall. And Bethel has a good baseline. You know who I talked to today? Your friend, Jerry Williams. He called, and the poor guy's been having such a hard time getting into our live stream, and but we walked him through it today, and he got on, and I'm going to go see him one day this week and just have a nice chat, because he's going to have some advice for me. I think he's a really sharp guy. But it's really important to me that everybody, whether they're sitting in here or whether they're on the website, they have the best worship experience possible. And so much of that, when we have such amazing music talent, is audio. And we've done the best we can, but we can make it so much better.
And we've already made some changes.
Yeah.
Like, I got so excited, even just the energy of Bethel. As soon as Liam was hired, the next thing I knew, like, there was like 5 volunteers moving wires around. Blair was spearheading where the sound mixing room would be. But there's a lot of energy behind this project, and exciting to see members already leaning in and making changes.
Yeah, and I'm getting feedback already that the last 2 weeks have been better. Carol gave me feedback. Brian just texted me. He watched it this morning. So, not that we don't want you here, but if you happen to be at home, I hope you see some real changes.
Yeah. So that was a lot. We whirlwinded through a lot of information. I can toggle between slides if there's something you want to ask questions about particularly, or you can absorb and we can relax too. But there's, this is, I guess, time for questions. And could you hand the mics?
I just wanted to say that, this is Rose Turnicliffe. I just wanted to say that our Lydia Circle has been meeting on Zoom meetings from almost the very beginning, wasn't it, Bonnie, that we started doing that? Mostly because we have a couple of members who just can't be in public. And doing Circle Online even has some. So 2 years, basically, we've been meeting online. So even for Circles, that digital piece has been a really nice option. Although I have to say, there was a lot of discussion about who could get in to the live stream, who couldn't. And so I know that was a big issue. And one of the first things we talked about was if we could only see the bulletin, because there's so much good information in the bulletin. And before I could even call to say, hey, can we do something? It was already done.
And that is a piece. I think the live stream needs the bulletin, and we're already on that. Pre-recorded, my hope is to get the words on that built in so that can be a screen-less or bulletin-less, paperless experience is what I'm going for. And again, the idea is to have a variety of options that are distinct and similar so that we are one congregation, but multiple ways of worshiping. In terms of the excitement of digital ministry, one thing that I am intrigued by is like the FAB group told me that one of the things they loved about Zoom was breakout rooms, and that it randomized, I don't think any FAB member would be offended if I said this, but I think early on in the technology piece, they didn't know how to control the technology necessarily. So the Zoom breakout rooms were randomized. You couldn't control it if you wanted to. And they realized how special this was because people weren't clicking up the way that we tend to do in person. And so when they came back in person, they figured out a way to randomize where people sat to enhance the cohesion of that group and the quality of discussions. Paula. You do for the online.
Just so people know, we do the same thing in Arla. Arla has never, the anti-racism group has never met in person. And that's, we bring people in from all over the country.
Yeah. And what is it, like the Arla meets at the exact same time as staff meeting, so it means I very rarely get to overlap.
We might change.
But when I logged on once, there was like over 40 people logged on. It's I believe one of the largest groups Bethel has.
Yeah, lately maybe it's been fewer,
Okay.
but they're coming from lots of places and churches and not churches, and it's a Bethel group, but not only a Bethel group. Same with FAB.
Yeah, neat. Thank you. Don.
Excuse me. I like your idea of keeping it real simple, because I think simple is really important. But I think we also, I visit a lot of seniors, and I think a lot of seniors, we have to identify who the seniors are that don't have that access, because there's many, many seniors I find out that they get very frustrated. Yeah. They get very disconnected. Their children get disconnected. They say, well, we can never get it on.
Yeah.
And I think keeping it real simple, but then somehow within, and maybe someone like myself, but we need to make a good, accurate list of the people that aren't. I was with our friends that I sit with every Sunday, and they were just very, very angry last week because they said they did not know that we're not having coffee last week.
Mm.
And I said, well, it came online. I got it online. And they said, well, we get all these different bulletins and we're so disconnected. So I think
keeping it simple, yeah.
very,
And
very
that's
simple.
an important piece. A goal I have for the theology around digital worship is changing. And so one big distinction I would like Bethel to make between our live stream and our pre-recorded, and eventually I'm not sure if I would always keep it in the live stream or if I end the live stream, but that's another consideration. But communion, especially as now we do have vaccines and our befrienders ministry and sacramental ministry is going again. I think it's really important that we send people to have communion with each other and share the sacrament versus fully. That's also an important theological piece in terms of every church is doing things a little bit differently, but as a denomination from the national level, the live stream, the online communion is frowned upon, and what happens is that it can threaten our ecumenical relationships with like the Episcopal Church. I would say the same debate is happening within the Episcopal Church, so I'm not that stressed about it, but that's where I'm going to deliberately pull back the pre-recorded option to just a service of the word. And to rely, like one thing I noticed when I visited the NRC, we have a wonderful Lutheran chaplain there who can set up and we have the television channel going again so that that's helping with the non-tech savvy members. But Mike Monsager makes sure that residents have the communion packets for when they're watching the live stream. But many times I go into the room and those packets are not opened because they're difficult for arthritic hands and stuff. But when we have time and we can do it together, then the sacrament can be shared. And so that's just a little note there. Yeah.
I'd like to really know the difference, getting back to your help, the associate and the deacon. What are things that deacons can't do that an associate could do?
Okay, it would be the biggest thing is sacrament. So they cannot preside over communion. And generally, in a worship setting, they probably would not baptize in a worship setting. Everybody's authorized to baptize in emergency settings. So what that would mean is that they might, if I was on vacation at Bethel, probably we'd have the deacons still signed up to preach, but we would ask Jean to preside over the table. But that is, I would say, for some of the retired clergy, not all, some are still very willing to preach, but for some that's a much less daunting ask. For our professors that are ordained, on top of their class schedule, to have to write a sermon, sometimes they don't have the time to give it what it needs. But if I say, can you preside? The deacon is preaching, they would say, absolutely. So the biggest thing is that, yeah, they can't do the sacraments.
How many deacons is there? Just be patient, young lady.
All right. I've only known 2 deacons in all my years as a Lutheran, and I'm wondering how many deacons are being trained through the seminary.
Yeah, it's a smaller number, but also that was a question sort of doing pre-work through personnel and council that I've asked the synod, and I would say it's a smaller number but a growing number in terms of, I think that a service heart is what is attracting the generations that are coming up, and so we're seeing more people train as deacons, but right now, there are fewer deacons available. There's also fewer job openings for them available. So the synod says we break even in terms of availability. I also think Bethel is a great congregation, and we can be proud of ourselves that we are a draw. Like, I think we can attract a deacon or an associate from farther afield than just the region too.
One more quick follow-up on that. Having been involved in both the last two call processes, and I think leaving it go to the call is good, but I think developing a really strong ministry site profile. I mean, that's where our groups have always really, I mean, that's where we get our candidates. And so I think developing a strong ministry site profile, realizing, I mean, do we need, elderly or youth or whatever? Because the candidates you get, I mean, this last time we had like 18 or Ben would know, 21, 22 candidates. We had to cut candidates off and trying to decide what we, so yeah. And Inger was like 21 and we hired her. No, but I mean, developing a good ministry site profile of what we need.
And even though it might seem like, well, can't we jumpstart because we just did it? No, Bethel's changed a lot in COVID and staffing and me. And so adjusting for what the new needs are and new skill sets. That goes back to this, what kind of balance are we looking at? What skills, as much as Pastor Tim and I respect each other, we have very different skill sets. And so Bethel staff has had to adjust to being like, she can't do that. Oh, but she can do bulletins. So there are things that the staff has worked around me and adjusted to me, but that we would need to update that ministry site profile. Yeah.
You know, there's a big difference when you're going for a replacement, like we do with Tim.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a lot different. You know, we were going for a replacement with Tim. When now we're going to supplement, I mean, it's a huge difference for a call process, and it'll be fun. It'll be exciting.
Yeah.
I think it'll be great.
Yeah. Yeah. If there's any, we can end, and if you're want to, I also was playing around. I'd have to close out this thing. I also could show you one thing I didn't talk about with digital worship is there's also a possibility for hybrid worship or hybrid pre-record. It depends on making sure you are on the internal server for Wi-Fi, I've heard. But something that you can do that I've found very special was to still gather like on a Zoom meeting so that you are at the same time and at the same, even from the comfort of your home, there's still something like in real time that you are connecting with the body of Christ, but still having the advantage of pre-recorded music and visual. So if you want, you could be dismissed, but I can, if you indulge me, I can play you a sample. Maybe? Okay. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it easily. Hopefully I can. Come on, little computer. It needs a moment. Okay. So this was really exciting to me, and may I have the sound, this for the sound. This was exciting for me because honestly, I haven't figured out how to do this. This was developed by a friend. It's called Cruciform Advent. And hold on, I'm going to do. It was a form of worship he developed for online worship. But I haven't figured out how to adapt it to in-person. And so the general form of service, this is a half-hour service that we were using in Advent last year. But you have 5 candles, and you do the same pattern every week. So you light the central candle first, representing Christ at the center of everything. Then the candle farthest away from you to represent God's world, the candle closest to you to represent yourself as a beloved child of God, a candle to the left, someone you struggle with, a candle to the right, someone you're close to. It was such a beautiful way of prayer, and I loved seeing the flickering candles, being this close to them. Even with a group this size, I can't figure out how to make it so intimate. But we would do a Zoom meeting. This was the welcome slide. I'm going to skip through a few things. This was to give credit to Reverend Stephen Bond in Pennsylvania. And then this was sort of, when we got to this slide, the assisting minister would unmute and read the slide. And then he would mute again, and we would go to lighting the next candle. And I'm going to see if this works. Oh, no, stop. Sorry. Is the sound working?
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.
So just a teaser of what you can do, why I'm so excited about digital ministry, and how it can do things that we can't do in person. I'm still want to adapt that for in person because I like it so much. And that one was particularly fun. We'd always keep the same songs on the first two slides, but then the other ones rotated with the readings and pulled different music. The tech side of things, I always kept the video the same because that was just lighting the candle, but changing the audio track underneath, changing the words on the screen can make it so different. So that's where I'd turn that over to Liam, but Liam will be even faster than me and better at that. But that's where a template can serve us well, but you can do cool things. So that was my little, thank you for indulging me with looking at potentials, but Bethel dreaming in 2022.